So far, we've talked about the 1890 Manifesto as well as the 1904 Manifesto. A third manifesto was issued in 1933, and that actually led to the formation of some polygamist groups. In this next episode, we'll talk about the Third Manifesto, as well as one specific group, the Apostolic United Brethren. You may be familiar with them if you watched the TV show Sister Wives with Kody Brown and his 4 wives and family. Check out our conversation with Anne Wilde. But before you do that, one thing I just wanted to mention was we're still looking for YouTube likes and subscribes. We'd like to get up to 100 people to subscribe, and then I can get my own YouTube channel instead of that gobbledygook URL that I have been using. So please subscribe on YouTube. Thanks. Now back to our conversation. All right, so let's jump back. We started going through the history, and we'll jump back to there again. So we talked about up to 1890, then 1890 to 1904, and then this period from 1904 to 1930-ish.
33 or I think 1933, about then.
So after the 1904 Manifesto was really the first time that a person could get excommunicated for practicing polygamy.
Yeah.
And I guess there were probably a lot of polygamists, so they didn't excommunicate everybody immediately, but they said if you contracted a new marriage, that was...
Yeah, but some of them did it in quiet still. I mean, let me just say that I know of cases, without naming anybody, that took new wives that were still members of the church in the last 20 years. But they were very quiet about it.
So church leaders didn't know about it.
Yeah. But when they and to be consistent, if they do find out, that they will hold a court and they will be excommunicated, which is it should be. That's right in the handbook.
Okay. So you're saying that this is still happening today. There are LDS members who are joining polygamy and still maintaining membership of their church.
Not a whole bunch of them.
Not publicly.
Yeah, certainly not publicly.
Right.
And not in great numbers. But there are isolated cases where that may be true.
Okay. So let's talk about this period, because you were talking about 1904 to 1933 and Joseph Musser. So what was happening in that period between 1904 and 1933 and Joseph Musser?
You mean in the church, or because there weren't any groups up until later on.
Okay.
Really, well, it's kind of like when the sun goes down. When does it get dark? It's just gradually. So the term fundamentalism wasn't even used until probably in the 1950s. Marky Peterson and Joseph Musser both used that term about the same time. So it was just not a real distinction of, oh, here's a polygamous group over here and they believe in polygamy and the church doesn't. You know, it was just kind of, they both went kind of parallel together, with some people still continuing it and the church gradually giving it up. So when Joseph Musser became the senior member of the quorum, this priesthood quorum they called it.
Okay, this quorum of 7.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now there was a quorum of 5 in 1886, and then 2 more were added. And then when Lauren Wilde...
Is that what it's called, is the quorum of 5?
Well, I don't... Some people call it the Council of Friends, or the Priesthood Council. It's known by different names.
Okay, so it doesn't have
telling you the story.
Specific name, I guess.
But when the last one was alive, Lauren Wilde, he was the last of that initial council that John Taylor called, then he was the last one, and he felt like he needed to, and I think he was told, to call some other men to keep that principle alive. So he called another council.
Was he? He was one of the original 5, and the other 4 had died? Or?
Oh, well, yeah, you had George Q. Cannon and Wilkins and, I can't remember, it's been a while, but there were at least 5, and then Joseph F. Smith was called when he got back from his mission in the Sandwich Islands in Hawaii as part of that council to keep, but this was all below the radar. So anyway, when they began dying off, then Lauren Wilde was the last one of that original council. And
had they called people in to replace the ones who had already died, or he
No,
was it?
they
They were down to one.
Yeah, down to one.
Okay.
Way I understand it.
Okay.
And so he called these other men I told you, Broadbent, Barlow, Musser, LeGrand Woolley, Charles Zitting, and Lewis Kelch. But a little at a time, not all at once.
Right.
Some of them were all at once, and then some of them were called a little later. So anyway, when Joseph Musser was the senior member, because the other three before him had passed away, then that's when the split happened. And it's too complicated to go into, but suffices to say that there were two members that they wanted to add to the quorum, and Joseph Musser was not in favor of that, and he called Rulon Allred, Owen Allred, and some others to another council. So there now there's two councils.
Two parallel councils.
Yeah, and each one claims that they're the only ones that have the authority, or the true priesthood, or whatever you want to call it. And so that's when the division began. Joseph Musser died in 1954, so this happened before that. They went to prison, and when he came out, he was not feeling well, and anyway, there's a whole lot of story behind that.
So 1933, why is that a pivotal year?
Well, because that's when Heber J. Grant really put teeth on the issues, that third manifesto.
Okay.
So then, then there was a real division then, a real separation, because there were some people that definitely felt like they ought to continue with that. They felt like it was an eternal principle, and in 1886 God says, I can't abrogate or do away with a true principle. If it's true now, it's an eternal true principle, and I can't take it back. So anyway, using that and other things as a basis, they went on living it separate from the church.
Okay, so Musser, up until 1933, was he a member of the LDS Church?
As far as I know, I'm not sure when he was actually excommunicated.
Okay.
There's a journal about him, and there's a lot of books. Brian would probably know the year. I can't remember offhand. I do know he died in 1954.
Okay, so up until about 1933, you could. So were there? So you said there were originally some apostles that were part of this Council of Five or Council of
Yeah, George Buchanan and Joseph F. Smith.
Okay, so Joseph F. Smith. So he's the one who issued these.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it?
Wow.
But the pressure was so strong from the government, and it's kind of like Wilford Woodruff. There was a lot of pressure, not only from the government, but from people inside the church. They didn't want to live it. They didn't think the church should live it. It was giving them a bad name. You go on and on. So there was the majority of the people in 1890 didn't want to live it. They were glad when the manifesto came around. And I think similar in 1904, when Joseph F. Smith felt pressured to give another manifesto.
So in 1933, we got the Third Manifesto, and that's when the church was like, we mean business. Okay.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that Heber J. Grant had 3 wives, and he made the statement that he's going to keep on living until somebody gave him a son, which never happened. But, there's a lot of stuff like that, saying one thing publicly and another thing privately. And you can understand that. It was the same way in Joseph Smith's time. He'd say one thing publicly and do another thing privately, because not only was the world not ready for what he was teaching, but a lot of the converts from England, polygamy wasn't a popular thing with most of them. Mm-hmm. And that's why he had to keep it kind of quiet and talk to those men only whom he knew were loyal to him and would accept it.
So the idea is in 1933 you could not contract any new wives. You could keep living with the ones that you already had.
Well, I even think at that time it was recommended you keep your youngest wife. Okay. The one you can have children with. It was recommended. I don't think it was a hard and fast law, but I think it was, and you could still recognize them as a wife, but you could not sleep with them. So that's why it was recommended you keep your youngest wife and have children with her.
Okay. So 1933, it sounds like there was a split among the polygamists. So you got the Allred group and then the Musser group?
Well, no, I don't. It wasn't the Musser group at that. Well, Joseph Musser called Rule and Allred, which became the Allred group.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, eventually the senior member was Leroy Johnson and Marion Hammond. Those are the two that were added that Joseph Musser didn't go along with. So they started forming their own council.
Okay, so the Allred group, if I'm correct, they're known as the AUB, the
Apostolic United Brethren.
And so they're. Can you talk about the AUB group, or what are some of their characteristics? I think most people are familiar with FLDS, but not as many people with AUB.
Well, the AUB has a council, a priesthood council. The number varies from time to time. They have a senior member of that priesthood council. He's called the president of the priesthood in that group. They do not have the strict appointment and control over marriages that FLDS does by any means. There's a lot more free agency. There's more than one member that has the keys of sealing, the head of the group, and then others that he designates can also perform marriage sealings. Their headquarters are in Bluffdale, but they have communities in Montana, Mexico, central Utah, so little communities around. They have a membership of about 7,500, and they have a lot of the same traditions as the LDS Church. They have a relief society and priesthood meetings and things like that.
Okay. Now you talked about a council. That wouldn't be like a council of 12 apostles or anything like that?
Well, like I say, the number of the council varies.
Okay. Would they be analogous to a quorum of 12?
Kind of. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily have to.
As far as I know, they don't have a president and two counselors. Now, maybe they do. I'm not a member of that group, so I can't tell you a lot of the details, what goes on.
Okay.
I have friends in the group, but we don't discuss a lot of that because I don't pry. So, but I know they have a president of the priesthood or a senior member of the quorum, one that's designated to be the leader, and then they have a number of apostles.
Okay.
Or I think they just prefer to call it a priesthood council.
Okay, but they're like apostles.
I guess, yeah.
All right.
I can't speak for them.
Yeah, okay. So is it true that Kody Brown, is he one of those? He's a
Yeah,
member of that
he
too?
came from that group. And I think he still considers himself a member.
Okay. So, and I know, I have to tell you, I feel like it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure that I love that show, but it's not on Netflix, so I haven't watched it for a while. But
Well, it only goes, so many sessions, and then they take 9 months off or whatever and do the filming, and then it comes again the next season.
So I know he lived in Lehi, Utah for a time, and then last I remember, and I haven't watched the show in years, they moved to Las Vegas. So I don't know if there's a big community in Las Vegas. No. I wouldn't think so. So in that case, is he just doing kind of a home church sort of thing?
Yeah, they have their own family meetings on Sunday.
Okay.
And I think if he comes up here to Salt Lake to visit or something, I'm not sure, but I think he attends some of the meetings. I'm not sure. He doesn't come up that often. But now that his children are going to school up here and college and getting married and so forth, then he has reasons to come back to Utah.
Okay.
To visit.
So, and I know his daughter, I want to say Madison, I can't remember, was going to Utah State, I believe, and she actually wanted to join the LDS Church, and
they wouldn't let her.
And they wouldn't let her, and she said, "I don't want to be a polygamist. I don't want to do anything." But they still wouldn't let her, because essentially the church policy is that you have to basically disown your parents, or I don't know if that's the right terminology, but.
Well, I think that varies. Without mentioning a name, there's a family whose son, I don't want to say anything that's going to get anybody in trouble. Let's just say that he joined the church, the LDS Church, had friends that were LDS, went on a mission for the church. He didn't have to deny his parents, but he had to deny his intent to live it. And he now is back from his mission, performed an honorable mission. He was not prevented from joining the church, even though they knew what family he came from.
Okay,
so that's what I say, it's going to vary. That was her experience, and I think it might have been because that family was so public.
Right.
And if that got out, that maybe they thought, the leaders, that it wouldn't look very good to have a daughter of a plural family join the church. But it's done.
It is done, okay. What do you think of that policy?
Well, it seems to me like somebody's being punished for somebody else's transgression. I believe there's an article of faith along those lines.
I think so.
I think it's too bad if she sincerely, and I think she did, sincerely wanted to join the church. I certainly think she should have had that privilege. Mm-hmm. And I call it a privilege because she looked at it that way.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Anne. Fundamentalist Mormons are known to returning back to the fundamentals of Mormonism. One of those fundamentals seems to be opposing gay relationships. What do polygamists think about gay relationships, and especially gay marriage?
I cannot speak for a group as a whole, but the fundamentalists that I know, I don't think have any problem with legal gay marriage.
Click here to subscribe, click here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some other videos that we've done here on YouTube. We hope you'll use this as a valuable resource to learn more about Mormon history.